Sure.
Welcome, everyone. We're here today um, doing our webinar on transitioning to life after COVID-19.
We're Sage Wellness Connection. We have been doing this, well, for a while now. We always like to start out just explaining who we are and why we got involved in wellness and well-being. And I always like to take a little bit of time and think about what webinar we're about to do as how it relates to how we got involved. I started out in on the more physical end of the wellness industry. Not to mention, of course, I had a rec therapy background, which also talked about leisure services in the old days. And it really talked about the psychological processes as you move through life and involving the recreational aspects in your life. And then how that can impact you as we go through different stages in our life, different events in our life, and things like that. And I think this, out of anything in this past year and a half, has taught us when something big happens and it impacts, well, basically the world, as we found out across time, that can impact us individually as well. And that is where we decided to expand upon things with Sage Wellness Connection, is taking all of those aspects that we have been training in, from psychological health and safety, the yoga, to all the personal fitness part of the training on the physical side of things, and put it all together, because every one of those aspects are impacted when we experience these type of life events. So needless to say, we put our collective heads together and decided that Sage Wellness would be that place where we can look to each aspect of wellness, from our emotional aspect, like we said, to the physical aspect, and bring all of that education experience to the table.
And I'm Paula, and like Shannon, I have a background in recreation as well. Mine is in program administration. And so again, from a young age, I was really interested in the physical wellness. And as I grew and learned different things, I started to develop an interest for the holistic health side of things as well. And I think, like Shannon said, when we're doing a webinar, we like to kind of relate our own experiences to why we were doing this webinar. And I think for myself, something that was really important for me was I was fortunate, I guess, that I had this background in things like yoga and Reiki and meditation and aromatherapy. And I was able to draw on that background and experience during the pandemic to be able to nurture myself and use those things as coping mechanisms for when I felt stressed or overwhelmed. And the psychological health and safety certificate that Shannon and I both have is specifically geared towards workplace wellness. And this was another area that obviously the pandemic has affected for a lot of people. And so we use some of that knowledge to be able to support our coworkers and support ourselves through working at home. And now that we are looking at opening things up, we're in Alberta here, and things are starting to open up in July. And so now all of these things that we've been doing to keep ourselves well during the pandemic, now it's almost like, what do we do? We've heard that from a lot of people. What is next now that things are opening up? What do we do? And so that's what we want to talk to you about today, is transitioning back to our new normal.
And I think that's exactly the point. Not only do we have to consider the aspects that were impacted across time, and like we said, this past year and a half, really across the board, I'm sure you could each one of our wellness domains, and something has been impacted. So we thought it was important to just talk a little bit around that wellness philosophy that we created for Sage Wellness, but also really talk about the impacts that people were feeling on their mental health across this time as well. And we have two great little studies that were done, one through Global News Network, and then the other one through the Rural Mental Health, that has really looked to see what areas people felt they were impacted by, and and to what degree and gravity that it has impacted them. And then we're going to move on to our worries that have, when we look at this, these two studies, what were our own worries and are they similar to what other people had felt as well? But we never want to just leave it there. We want to talk about some transition strategies because, like Paula said, we'll be moving now from this world where we've been locked down, uncertain. Sometimes we're open, sometimes we're not, and now we begin given news that we will be. So how does that impact our home life? How does that impact working, no matter what the type of work is? How does that impact our children? How does that impact that broader world that we're about to be a part of? So we really want to talk around those strategies. And then, of course, we'll leave it with where do we go? And maybe if you have some other ideas around that, that's also, we'll be more than happy to hear that too.
And for some people, I think when we're talking about transition strategies, we want to address those who actually felt safer during the pandemic. They weren't expected to be putting themselves out there in the community. They weren't having to say yes or no to invitations to go out and socialize. They weren't having to go to Christmas parties, and they could work from home. And so some people preferred that. And now it's a little bit scary thinking about getting back into the world. So, how do we manage that as well? So, we'll address some of those through the evening also.
And I think that's such a great point because often we just think about those extroverted people and what they lacked or missed during that time.
Mm,
What they felt was that removal and exclusion of people within the world. But there's a whole lot of people that don't interact with the world that way. So there's a lot of worry in coming back with that high
mm,
expectation.
absolutely. A lot of anxiety around that.
Oh, absolutely. We do want to talk a little bit about how this project and what we've been doing is funded, which is through the Rural Mental Health Project. And this has been giving us that basis of what we're providing, what we're looking at in the communities. And one thing that we really resonates with us is that this program and this funding is about creating things that are community driven. So when we're looking at how our communities impacted in that mental health realm of things, they really want to make sure that we're just looking to the community. Even though we can always look for generalizations across community to community to community, we're still going to see differences, right? Just like we're going to see a difference between urban settings and their access to services to these rural settings and our accesses out here. So that needs to be one of the primary goals, that anything that we develop, not only should it be sustainable, it needs to be driven by the community itself. And by saying that, it's got to be a strength-based approach. We're not, it's easy sometimes, this pandemic has taught us that, how to find some gaps, and gaps that I don't even think have to do necessarily with the pandemic as much as they've always been there. And this just brought them up, bubbled them up to the surface to say, oh my goodness, we do have some gaps that need to be served. But that doesn't mean we can't look at it from a very strength-based approach to see, hey, what do we have in our communities that could support these crisis concerns, whatever the case might be. We have a lot of great things happening, but sometimes people don't know about them. So we got to make that connection point too, and not only celebrate what services we have, but make sure that people know about them. And then when we looked at that whole community view, we were not just picking out one portion, though I'm sure we could and spend all our money and time on that just to support that, to get that in a great place. But we know that we have everybody involved in our community, regardless of age, development, culture, ethnicity. All of those things must be taken into account when we're looking to put together mental health and well-being type programs, that we're not leaving anybody out of that picture. We're getting those viewpoints coming in from everybody so that we can make sure we're serving everybody. And then, of course, that developmental piece is not just talking about, that chronological piece that, of course, we're serving from zero till whenever, that of course we're considering that, but it has to meet the developmental needs of the people. So it's not always about chronological ages, but it is about the development of people and really making sure that we're developing programs that speak to that as well. And then finally, there's that the sixth approach, I guess you might say, is that belief that it's 5 in 5 people that have mental health. We often have a stigma around this word of mental health and what it means to people, and it's really created many perceptions in people. We're trying to remove that and get people to understand mental health is not a bad word, a scary word. We all have mental health. It's just what do we need to do to strengthen it? No different than we strengthen our muscles.
Mental health doesn't have to be followed by the words issues or challenges. It can be that your mental health is strong and vibrant as well. So it is just shifting that thinking around the word mental health.
Yes, and I think that will reduce again that stigma around having conversations when people
Mhm.
see it as a word that comes with some of that strength and resiliency as well.
Absolutely. So, our wellness philosophy is um, we'd like to look at a holistic view. We take a holistic approach to wellness and we look at all the areas of in the wellness wheel. So, the 8 domains or dimensions of wellness. And we look at how all of these areas are interconnected and related. And so, how do we work with each area to really balance out our lives, to create harmony within our lives? And we like to also look at the wellness wheel because in terms of some areas we have strengths and some areas need to be cultivated and we need to create some energy around those areas because when one area is really um, low or like if our physical wellness is really off, we're not putting a lot of energy into our physical wellness, things become out of sync because of this interconnectedness.
And I think that's what I appreciate when we really look to that wheel. It gives us that concrete picture to what does that mean when something is out of sync? There's no
Mhm.
perfection in this. We know that. There's no wheel that's perfectly puffed up all the way around and everything's perfect and going exactly the way we want always. But it's finding ways to maybe support, like Paula had said, that maybe our physical wellness was something that we had to put on the back burner because we were managing and dealing with finances and emotions and all of these things. But that doesn't mean if we leave it out for good, we're going to then pay just as much of a price in our emotions, our finances. If we can't get to work because we're physically not healthy enough to be there, it's impacting our finances. If we have too much stress, we're not only not doing something that maintains our physical health, we're impacting all of those, maybe those social pieces, right? We're not connecting with people as much as we may need for our own well-being. So there's all kinds of aspects that, of course, are interconnected, is what we like to say. And as Paula had said about that harmonious piece, we're just trying to find a balance that works for you so that you can acknowledge when something is feeling the way it should, like that intellectual piece. Maybe you're not feeling as stimulated at whether it be work or just in your life. And you could find a way intellectually where you can work towards having that curiosity again, whatever it comes from. Or is it about the your occupation? Is there something that is just not fitting for you right now? That doesn't mean you need to run away from your job. We're certainly not suggesting that. But maybe there's ways that you can reinvigorate that by tapping into all those other pieces that we do have on the wheel.
And we do have other webinars that specifically look at the domains of wellness. And please take a look at them. And if you have any questions, feel free to send us an email or message us on social media, and we'd be happy to have a conversation or email you some additional information to help you explore this further.
Absolutely. And this is just a little picture to give that, once again, that concrete look at, giving a number always, puts a kind of an amount to an area that, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that I was actually feeling below a 50% or a 5 on my social wellness. So maybe that's an area I need to look at. But hey, I'm feeling right now really strong on my intellectual wellness. So that's not an area that I have to fully engage in. And so we use this when we do that beta, deeper dive, as we call it, and use our evaluation piece to decide which areas might need a little bit more work and support. And like we said, we've put out the personal assessment in some of our other webinars that it takes that more specific look at each one of those areas and ask those questions to really get the brain thinking about each one of those areas so you can make a good assessment. It's not like, hey, I don't know, maybe a 4 or maybe a 5. It's based on something as to why you landed on that number.
I think as we go through this webinar, because we are talking about transitioning, and often in times of transition, we are faced with some adversity, some stress, some uncertainty. And I think this is where we can use the wellness wheel to our advantage. We could look to our strengths to compensate for some of those areas that we are feeling that we have that we're lacking in or having some challenges in. And we can use our strengths to basically help pull us through in some of those other areas as we need it.
Mhm. So this is just getting to some of those research pieces that I was talking about. Global News put out a quick poll in March with, like you said, 1,000 people responding to it. And what I found interesting is that approximately one third, so we're looking at over 300 people, felt their physical health really took a hit in this past year and a half. I think that was for multiple reasons, right? It's not always just, hey, I just abandoned it, didn't know what to do. Sometimes it's an access thing. Not everybody has, access even within their own home or has the skill set to know what exactly they could do. And I think we saw that across time, the accesses to things online and things like that. But as we figured out, it wasn't just purely about access, it was also about motivation. And then when our whole world was turned upside down, we looked in other directions as opposed to maybe those traditional aspects that we would look to strengthen our physical health. And people kind of walked away and stepped back from that. And I think that's why we see such a high number in that area.
Well,
But
and I think also with physical health, like I said at the beginning of COVID, when people that maybe have to push themselves a little more to get out there, and we were all, hunkered down, waiting. We didn't know how long COVID was going to last, and so if we're thinking, oh, a month, maybe 3 months, and we're okay to put things on the back burner for that short amount of time, but as you know, when things got longer and longer and longer, and we were in lockdown or quarantine or just on stay at home orders, and we had made those conscious decisions to just take a break from exercising for a while, I think what happened for a lot of people is they just didn't know how to get back into it. The gyms were closed, their workout um, groups were canceled, they couldn't meet with their workout partners, they didn't have space at home, and then it became winter and they couldn't even walk outside the way that they could in warmer weather. And so I think it was just so many things affected people's ability to really take care of their physical health.
And I think too, this is kind of what speaks to that why we look at those 8 domains, right? It never is just about physical health. It is, lots of people use this as their social connection. Well, you take that,
Mhm.
it's hard to get motivated or get started if that's a very big piece to what motivated you to get there, right?
Yeah.
Or
Well, and physical health is not just necessarily about the exercise either. And sometimes when we do let one thing slide with our physical health, other things are affected. Our sleep can be affected, our eating can be affected. Maybe we're not drinking enough water, we're not taking our vitamins because our routines in general were affected. And like you said, Shannon, if people are using this for social connections, that's also going to affect so many other things in your life as well when it comes to wellness.
absolutely. And I think, that when you come back to those sleeping pieces, sometimes we underrate that as well, how stress can play into that. We're not sleeping as well. When we have pieces that aren't predictable, like if anything, we've learned how resilient are you when you're not really sure, are we going to be open? We're not open. Are we going to be
Mhm.
at offices? Are we not? Yeah, so many of those pieces just play into that and affects our sleeping. And then it just becomes all of these snowball effects of, oh,
Yeah.
I'm not sleeping well. I don't feel that well. I don't think I could work out today, even if I was doing a few sit ups at home. No way, because I'm just so exhausted. So it is just this constant snowball, as we would.
Well, and so many people worried about money, right? So they're not going to spend any money that they didn't need to spend because they are worried about their job security.
Absolutely. You think of how many people did not know what this meant, right? Not
Mhm.
your small businesses. That is a big piece too,
Yeah,
that we we almost forget because we think of them as a business. Well, how can you be prepared for something that you have no idea when it's going to end? And
right.
then it's like, who would ever have thought across time that all of the people in the restaurant industries and all of that would be laid off in and out all the time. So that's a lot to manage when we didn't have the history in order to tell us, hey, if we just wait this long, if we just hold on this long. So yeah, there's just so many variables in the impacts that we experience across this year and a half.
And then the physical health, all that stress around it has created then the mental health. So 43% said their mental health had deteriorated since the start of the pandemic. Absolutely. And these are just 43% of people that actually reported this. How many people are struggling and they have that history of being told that you just suck it up and you keep going. And then they're not noticing how they're really feeling and how it's really affected them.
Yeah. And sometimes people can't even acknowledge it until they know it's almost over, right?
Yes,
Because
exactly.
there's that sense of, hey, if I acknowledge this in any way, I just might be done altogether. So it's
Yeah,
that
they just keep forging ahead.
just keep going. Yeah. And I think, it's almost like it is good to know that's like almost 400 and some people, almost 450 people that, which is close to, 50% of people, even in that very small poll, reporting that there's been this deterioration. And then in what aspects? Because this didn't really separate out those aspects either. So,
Right.
are they even sure? Which can make it even more daunting if you're not even sure exactly how that's impacted your mental health. You just know something is not right.
Well, and it's just even going back to what you said about 5 out of 5 people have mental health. Well, if the people answering these questions did not quite understand what it means by mental health, or they're being influenced by the stigmas around mental health, that might impact their um, how they're answering the question as well.
Mhm. I agree. We easily probably could have seen 900 people say that
Yeah, for
they're
sure.
in, because of the uncertainty. I think that we have to keep that in mind. And the fact that we didn't have anything in our present history that anything that our generations would have lived through to say, oh, but remember when we didn't have that.
Yeah,
So that makes quite a
yeah,
bit.
exactly. Hmm.
And I think what I like about this other survey that we found through the Rural Mental Health, and it was through Canadian Mental Health Association, is that it just kind of breaks down things a little bit more, but certainly supports almost the same messaging. And, and it makes some of the maybe generalizations as well, or like things that we'd almost expect when we look like at people that would identify themselves as female of, I don't want to say of course, but more often not, that is what we see, that they're more likely to answer these type of surveys. And I think that from my reading, they did their very best to try to really look to who they were sending this out to make sure we're getting that broad perspective of people. But this is almost more typically what we get back, in that we did see that 80% of people that identify as female are who sent that back. But it was, I want to say, still nice to see that we did still get some others still coming and willing to do the survey. But I think some other interesting things when we look at this is that almost half of the people that responded were in that range between 35 to 55, which is interesting, right? Because it doesn't necessarily speak to that little bit younger generation of that, anywhere from 18 up. Well, there's barely, barely any. I think it's like 1.6%, up to 25 that actually responded. And then between that 25 and 34, we still got 14%, which is, I'm glad they did, but it was definitely um, up from that 35 on who is responding to this. And I think the one other notable thing is at least there was a good split between the urban and rural people. So it gives us, I think, a
Yeah, I
slight,
saw that as well. That's
yeah. But one thing I think was important in this survey is I like how they broke it down, right? It wasn't just about, hey, physical health, mental health, and what does that really mean? They really took to some specific things in that survey that I think, people we've heard across media, people even speaking out about some of their worries and things like that. And one of the main thing was that isolation. And even it didn't really matter which side of the coin basically you're on as far as were you the more extrovert or introvert, but it was still
right.
around isolation because I think we get confused that the introvert doesn't want to have anything to do with family and friends and things like that, and that's not the case. So I think when we looked at that, that's like 50% basically of people responding that isolation did factor into some of their worries and impacts on their mental health. And what I think is interesting in it though too is that in that 50% that the focus was on other people's worries about isolation, where the 22% of the people that responded actually had worries for themselves. So that's interesting how people could relate that to other people and their concern about isolation, but yet, right? I would hazard a guess that that's also speaking for themselves. I don't want to speak to
Yeah, for sure.
but I think that any one of us could see that when things were unpredictable and we were cut off, at Christmas times and some of the biggest holidays, of course, that had to play a little havoc on your heart and soul and all of those kind of things when you can't connect to the people that you would expect to see around a dinner table, just as something that we don't even think about, we just expect to happen. And those are some big occasions that are already emotional for people
Yeah, for sure.
when they didn't have people. But the other thing, which I think is interesting too, is that worry around the access to mental health support and services. That like 33% were speaking to having some worries around that. So when we look, in that amount, so we're talking like 600 people are reporting to say they're worried about access, and that once again, that was split right in half between those urban areas and rural areas. So it wasn't just because we live out, in an area that it takes, we don't have public transportation, all of those kind of things. Some of our urban counterparts were feeling the same thing, that they weren't going to get access to services if they needed it. So that's really
Mhm.
important to know. Um, and then, of course, their challenges to their mental health. Um, that is more specifically, they're talking more about that pandemic-induced mental health challenge. They really feel they were relating it specifically to that, as opposed to maybe there was some other um, mental health and well-being pieces that they were getting support with. This was actually looking specifically to pandemic-induced challenges. And of course, that's quite a few, once again, 1/3. So you're talking that 600 people, pretty close, reporting that. But I think quite importantly is the anxiety that we saw 32% were really concerned about a heightened anxiety. And I'm sure some know that they live already with some anxiety. And I'm sure if we're all honest, we all have a level of anxiety. It's just how do we manage that anxiety? Because
Sure.
something that can be positive, anxiety is okay to a degree that maybe it gets us thinking about things a little bit, but when it's overtaking our actions is when we need to maybe look at it in a different way.
Well, and if anyone was watching the news and listening or reading anything on websites like Alberta's website or the Canada .ca or whatever, they're getting different information, and it was changing so much. You would hear that for people from people that were directly in the healthcare professions, that they couldn't keep up with what the changes were and what the new restrictions were and what they were supposed to use for PPE and all of that. So that is playing into anxiety as well. And so just by going about your normal everyday tasks of listening and hearing people talk and watching the news, it was probably impacting the anxiety as well.
Yeah. And we've always, somewhat said that, right? That really have to, it's great to be informed, and I think I look to myself, I feel like that's a piece of how I manage my own anxiety feelings or anxious feelings, is I like to have a whole lot of information. But I can even know when I have hit a wall of too much information and it is sometimes contradicting. That's no longer helping me feel like I've got a whole lot of information that I have something to work with. It's just like, oh my goodness, I don't know, do I believe this, do I believe that, what's coming next? So I think it's really good to work on a balance of information. Like I know I
Yeah.
challenge myself with that all the time, or I'm going to be that person as well that's well beyond that heightened side of worrying about as my anxiety increased as well, for sure.
So when was the survey, when was it done?
This one was right around the same timeline in April. So the first one was in March. So this is very current. Like these are just
Oh,
re
like just this year. Okay.
and I think that's what's interesting in it, right? Is because this isn't last year, because I know there's surveys out there from last April and in May as well. This is the current look at where people feel now. So we've been through some ups and downs and changes
Mhm.
and downs and opens and all of those kind of things. Yet we're kind of sitting similar. If you go back to some of those older surveys, there's some of the same things as we kind of came out of May into June, where people were sitting in the same
In
place.
2020. Yeah, that
Yeah.
would be interesting because I know that's what I was wondering. Would the anxiety be higher around that time? Economic concerns, would that be higher because that was right in the thick of things? And what about when the variant started to show up? What were people feeling then? Because that was really actually scary at those times. There was so much uncertainty as well.
Oh,
So
absolutely. And
yeah.
because of this rural mental health one coming out in April, we're almost right in the middle of that variant piece, right?
Mm.
Even we were coming out of Christmas, yes, we're hearing lots about it, but different provinces were making different decisions at the time. So there was so much different information, and it was, like one province would be moving ahead, one province would be shutting down, numbers were going up. And I know here in Alberta, right, we were still going up, hence what led to
Yeah.
our eventual shutdown in May. So that's is what makes it truly interesting that this being done in April, where people are at, but then you compare it to a year ago ish, not quite a full year, but still very, very similar results.
And it's interesting to see that the family and relationships is lower. And that could because maybe there was some really good new developments in relations because people were actually spending more time, probably spending less money on activities and actually spending more time sitting around a table playing board games,
Yes, reconnecting.
talking and, reconnecting. Absolutely. Learning to communicate in different ways.
And I think the one interesting thing that certainly came out of the older version, and I would assume it would be very similar even today, they were talking about the difference in early births, even, and partially having to do with that reduction. Oh, you would think it would be more stressful, which it was for many. I'm not taking away the stress of, the unpredictable pieces of having a baby during COVID, but they saw a very big reduction on preemie babies, and I strongly believe is because families were, people had to stay home. You couldn't work, all of those kind of things. So it kind of took those pieces away, even though I'm sure some other stresses were there. Absolutely. But it was, they truly believe, and I'm sure that will be vetted over time, whether it's true or not. It was because of that piece of coming back together. You need to be home with family. So you had some support around you where some wouldn't have, not because of for negative reasons, just purely because everybody's busy and working and trying to make things happen.
Mhm. The education piece does surprise me, though, that it's as low as it is. I would have actually expected that to be higher, but maybe when the survey was taken, they can see that it's almost summertime, it's the end is near.
And I do wonder if that's a little bit around perception. When you look again to the numbers of ages of people answering this survey,
True, true.
right, 18 to 25 5-year-olds, which would be, probably the most impacted in the educational side of things, like as far as post-secondary, because they didn't do any little kiddos. It was such a small number that
Mhm.
our perceptions of maybe supporting the child who was in university or post-secondary school, maybe we felt that it wasn't as much of an issue. Now, if we maybe went to students who were in the thick of it, maybe in April of all times when they'd be doing exams, maybe they might have
Yeah,
reported.
for sure. I think so. But let's just go back to the uncertainty about the future for just a second here. So that's interesting, those numbers there.
Yeah, I think so too, because, once again, so we're talking about 20, 25, so about a quarter, so maybe around 300-ish people.
Mhm.
But it's also looking to that 30%, we're worried about the length, right? And that's that unpredictability piece. Like, is this going to end or is it going to
Yeah,
start up again? But then there's still that other 24% that were really reporting around people are using this word new normal. What does that
yeah,
actually mean, right? Like, we all kind of throw it out there because we're all, I think, trying to get some feedback to us to say, hey, if I say new normal, what are you going to say back to me? What does that actually mean? Because we can't seem to get to a point of what that new normal is, or get
yeah.
all, even Canada, on board with everybody just saying the same thing from province to province. So I
Well,
think
yeah.
that's,
And is this just the new normal?
yeah,
The uncertainty and
hence the word.
all of it, right? Yeah.
You're right. Like, does this mean that we're going to go through waves now? This is going to just be a part of life, and we're looking
Mhm.
10 years back and saying, oh yeah, I remember when this started, right? This is just kind of how it is. In the fall, we wear masks because that's better. We get a booster or whatever. I think people would probably prefer to be there to just know that that's kind of where the expectations lie,
Yes,
as opposed
exactly.
to what does it mean? Every year we're going to have a new variant kind of thing.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
think this gives us a little bit of a foundation before we talk about actually transitioning, because I think there is, Alberta in July, like I said earlier, we are opening up. And so we have to move forward. Many
Absolutely.
people that were working at home are now going back into the office and so on. So,
Yeah. And then what does it look like, right? And I think
mhm,
this is what I like, what we're about to do here is just really look inside yourself. Um, how did this make you feel, right? What did it mean to you? Like, these are worries that were coming from other people, and it doesn't have to be about worries. Maybe there's some great things that came out of it as well. So
that's
it's
right.
okay to acknowledge that. So on this page, we've done it if you've attended some of our other workshops where we call it annotate. So you can put your thoughts on here, and then we keep it, and we just like to ask some of the same questions and a few different ones to see if there's some changes and where people land, things like that. So if you're just scrolling up to the top, you're just going to look for that view option button. And then as we look down the list, it'll be annotate. And then you still have to click on the text unless you're like super fancy and you can draw it out. For me, I will, just probably use the text. And then you can even pick a color if you want, and then we'll give you a few minutes to throw some of your ideas down. Um, and then, yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah, let's take about should we take 3 minutes? That brings us to 6:45. Okay, perfect. I'm going to let my dog out of the room at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some great ideas are starting to come out of here, definitely as reported in the other ones, some people still feel isolated, um, unsure what the future might hold, anxious about being without a mask. Absolutely, right? There's differing opinions about, how that they were interviewing a gentleman who is running a nightclub, and that's what he said. Like, he said, I'm not sure. I've not had so many people in a room before if I'm okay without my mask on. Yeah, definitely. That future, like the worried about the future piece, like what will that be? Like, it goes back to those kind of thrown out words of the new normal. Yeah, and the communication with family or the lack thereof, you know, reconnecting with families. And maybe it's an opportunity to connect in a way that you hadn't before. I think that these type of methods have, even opened the door where some people would have been resistant about connecting with family in this way. But if we go back, 20 years ago, the best you could have done is pick up a phone, and could you afford to have that conversation for too long? Well, it would cost you an arm and leg. So, yeah, things are different, but sometimes it's just changing our thoughts around that different too.
Looks
And
like
of course,
one just,
disappeared.
yeah. Oh,
Oh yeah, sometimes
my
they,
my internet connection is telling me it's unstable if I start freezing. That is why.
yeah, yeah, no worries. Yeah, my children are worried about school and missing peers for sure. We hear that, of course, lots about, we know that children's connections can be a little bit fragile with each other because they're constantly growing and developing as it is. And then there's that stress if you don't stay with, your group of peers, what's going to happen, what's that going to look like, that kind of going in and out for sure does bring a whole different understanding and anxiety sometimes around that too. Definitely know some really great ideas. Um, if there's just a few more, and then I'll make sure I save it, because like I said, we like to use it and compare again when we go back to people. Oh, yes. I'm sure this getting back on your feet financially is speaking to anyone, whether you're a small business owner or just somebody who their employment is, we talked a little earlier about the restaurant industry, and they're certainly not the only ones, but if you're serving staff, anything like that, you're laid off. Oh, we need you. Oh, only for a few days. That's very tough to live on, for sure. And I know even in our human service industry, um, as many people were redeployed as they could be, but there was a whole lot that when we were no longer serving face to face, that became, a part of their financial picture as well, that they can count on that money. And, people aren't working 2 and 3 jobs just because they want to do it for fun. Typically, it is to be able to support their family. So yeah, lots of great ideas. We'll just give it one more minute, and then we will um, save it from there. Yeah, we had another one saying about that lack of communication with families. I think, maybe that also ups our appreciation, or maybe our little bit of tolerance when we know we have something that we always believed couldn't be taken away. Sometimes our families take that hit of we don't put the time and effort in, especially those extended families at times. And maybe we've also been taught in this last year and a half the importance of that communication, how
Yeah,
easy and fragile
absolutely.
it can be taken away. Yeah, I'm just going to save this then. Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for your participation in that.
Oops, sorry. I'll wait till you clear it.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. So, um, If you have them.
Oh, you have the video, right?
Yes, I do.
I will stop sharing. We'll just have a little video to share.
Hopefully that will.
Music has always been an outlet for Dr. Grant Kennedy. Coming home at the end.
I
Sorry
can
about
hear it, but I can't see it.
this. I'm just trying to get him on here.
Yeah, I think going through the pandemic and having it go through Christmas, like you were talking about, was really tough because so many people did not see their families. My
Yeah.
son wasn't able to come home for Christmas, and
I'm sure it's the first time ever for myself where I've not had my nieces and everyone around and bringing their special people to the table as well. So that's a totally different thing.
yeah, for sure.
So
Lots of Zoom Christmas meetings for sure. Zoom get-togethers, that's for sure. I think we learned a lot of different ways to communicate and connect with people. And so it's definitely not all bad.
Hmm.
Are you having some trouble, or are you just waiting for me to stop talking?
Can you see my screen?
I can see it, but it's just in the,
Okay, so I'll hit
you'll
play.
have to expand it.
Yeah, I just didn't want to do that if,
I couldn't see it.
yeah, so you still see it?
Yep.
Okay,
End of a stressful.
there we go.
Music has always been an outlet for Dr. Grant Kennedy.
Coming home at the end of a stressful shift, it's been there for me.
But when the pandemic hit, the Calgary
I can't hear it now, Shannon.
Knowing, I guess, what was coming at us, 3 young kids at home, the stress of just worrying, what if one of us gets sick and what are we going to do? And who's going to look after the kids if that happens?
Kennedy just released a 5-track EP with songs written during the pandemic that chronicle the grief, stress, and isolation he experienced.
The struggle that I was having at the time with my mental health and sort of not recognizing who I was really to some extent in that time.
The song "The Self You Used to Know" describes the insidious effect stress has on people.
Stress changes you, and it can do a lot of negative things, to your makeup. I noticed myself kind of changing, my demeanor changing, and I'm usually a really positive person.
Kennedy says both he and his wife are in a much better space now. Being vaccinated has played a big part.
Following that up, dealing with critical patients in the hospital since, there's definitely a weight lifted there. It's kind of more like it used to be.
Kennedy hopes he can connect with others through his music and lyrics. From someone on the front line who knows how mental health can suffer, a reminder to breathe slow. Music has always been an outlet for Dr.
Things don't want to flow smoothly.
At the end of a stressful shift, it's been there for me.
But when the pandemic hit, the Calgary emergency room doctor needed.
Did it start over?
Yeah, it's done. Yeah.
Okay.
His wife is
Definitely wants
also
to
an ER.
misbehave.
Yeah. Well, I think you have the link on the PowerPoint, right?
Yeah.
I will bring the PowerPoint up again. So it's Dr. McIntyre.
Yes.
Is that his name? So
Yes.
even if you search globalnews.ca, Dr. McIntyre, that might work as well to be able to find the video
Yeah.
clips.
Definitely. It's just a short little video that I wanted to share because, you know, these are people that were right in the middle of it well, and they had to begin to look for ways where, like he had said before, they're really just focused on the work that they did. This made them rethink as well because it impacted them, and I think it caught them by surprise as well that it could impact them as it did. And then they had to look to all those aspects of their world too, and their life and who they were and their mental health and well-being, and find strategies to get back to feeling okay again.
Yeah. And when you're feeling like something else is pulling you and taking control over you, that need to um, have some control back is super important. And I think it's really tough when things are feeling out of control in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And these people are, people that
Sorry.
as well, right? To know what stress looks like. But like he said, there's nothing that could have prepared them to what this stress would look like.
Absolutely.
All kind of feel that way. And that's what I like about this, what we call the movement cycle, is it's not just, we like to think of things like, whether it be a grief cycle or a growth cycle, is almost like a circle.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. But I think it just represents well what many people went through, and sometimes we bounce back to. Like they talk about, that growing anger piece. Well, we saw that lots. If we watch any form of news, right? People that normally would be very compliant and willing and helpful, feeling so angry that because of this sense of loss of control of their life, that they're acting out as well. And that often can, what they call like a trigger point, kind of set things in motion. And we saw that last year for sure. We went through that heroic stages where, people were out clapping for what we call our front.
Holding signs up. I think in Wainwright here, we had people putting hearts on windows to celebrate those on the front lines. And that wasn't just nurses and doctors and people in the healthcare. It was people that are working in residential care homes and daycares and grocery stores and all of that as well, which, yeah, definitely all fit into that heroic phase.
Yeah. And I think what I appreciate about that phase is we actually took notice of like how many people go in the store every day and not even think twice about who is behind the counter, who got the food on the shelf, right? All of those kind of things
Yeah.
just expected to be. And just like if we're not in and out of nursing homes or long-term cares or whatever the case might be, we're not really thinking about, hey, who made that happen? Who's the person doing the laundry to make sure
Yeah. Cooking the meals, all
everyone.
of it.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it did bring some, like, highlight some really great things of what people do for a living and how hard the work is, and that they had to remain at risk the whole time. It's easy to identify your doctors and nurses, and I'm not taking anything away from the work they did.
No, absolutely not.
It was important, obviously. But there was a whole lot of other people that had to still stand and watch multitudes of people walk by them, touch things, and be uncertain about how this was going to impact them. And then not only them, but also when they went home, was this going to impact their family? So
Yeah.
it really did bring about this phase where we really felt we wanted to be supportive collectively as a community. And like Paula said, we're out cheering and putting all kinds of things up. And I do see where we went through that honeymoon phase. We were okay with that. We're all in this together. We can get through it. But of
We
course,
can bake some bread and we can do all those things. And people were excited about that. And that was definitely during the honeymoon period.
yes, and playing games, all the things.
Yeah.
right? Or not that they didn't do, but just didn't have the time and a regular basis to.
Yeah, and their kids weren't, asking to go all these, I want to go to the movie, I want to go to the pool, I want to go. They were actually at home and parents were enjoying that for that during that time.
'Cause I think sometimes we forget, well, what does it mean to be a family? And
Yeah,
I think you can do a whole lot of wonderful things by doing things too. But it just brought us back to that a little bit of a simpler piece.
back to basics.
Yeah. And people were really willing to accept that because I think they really felt, and I know even in myself, I didn't feel like it was some long-term commitment.
Right.
I
Well, and
was
I think people were probably enjoying a little bit of a break, a little bit of quietness for that a short period of time.
absolutely. Until, of course, we hit a wall, and that's where this disillusionment piece comes in, where, as we suggested, when we talked about those anxiety pieces, when you're hearing all different kinds of information, it's changing quickly. Now we're wearing masks. So now you're going to stay 6 feet away. Now you can't enter this place.
Now
But
the masks aren't working, they might not be good enough. And,
so much
mhm,
contradictory information, and it was really hard to know kind of how to act, and that really supports that disillusionment piece, right?
right.
We get a whole lot of conspiracy theories happening, and I don't want to make this a political conversation in any way. It's just a natural human behavior way of when we're hearing differing opinions and information's coming to us. Of course, you're a little, feeling disillusioned by the process because you don't know when it's going to end or what's going to solve the problem.
Yes. And
We
I think a lot of people felt really helpless also.
Absolutely. I think that absolutely that's such a key point to bring upon that feeling because if you can't, we're so accustomed to being able to solve the problem, and then
Mhm.
that, and
We're
when we,
being told that we have the ability and the power to solve our own problems.
Mhm. Absolutely. And, then we kind of came out of that when we got a bit more freedom, I think is really was the key to that change and that disillusionment, where we
Mhm.
were really willing to learn a little bit more, kind of do what we needed to. We reflected it on what has happened. And then that can lead us to that regrowth
Mhm.
piece of things. Um, our situation though that we have to look at is we kind of bounced around, right? We just didn't follow this nice little cycle, and now we're in regrowth, and um, we just can move forward. Across that year and a half, we kind of flipped back. We kind of had a little bit more of a honeymoon. It's okay, we can get through this again. Then we're disillusioned. But I really think people feel to some degree, that's what they're suggesting, anyways, that we might be with where we're at and the information that we're given around people having shots and opening some borders and all those kind of things, that maybe we're on that regrowth path now.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's why we wanted to look at talking about the transitioning back to life after COVID, without giving it a label, like calling it the new normal, because I don't think we're quite there yet to give it a definitive.
And that also sets an expectation up or sets an expectation. And this new normal might not actually live up to something exciting. It might just be actually the same, and we have to get a booster shot every year or something. So I think that sets people up to be disappointed or to look for something that might not even be there. And so we don't want to do that either.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great point because we don't want to keep falling back to that disillusionment, right? Because it's
Right. Exactly.
forward. So instead of trying to just guess where we're going, it's really looking and reflecting to, yeah, where we've been, the great
Mhm.
things that we got out of it as well. Because if we're only going to look to all of the things that we lost in that year, it is very hard to motivate yourself to find like even purpose and meaning to move forward. But
Absolutely.
you, Paula, you brought up some great things around the time family we're spending together, playing those games, reconnecting on that level, and just appreciating that. Maybe that can't happen all the time, but it certainly opened a door to say, hey, maybe that's something we can carve out for our
Yeah.
future. Because
Let's
that,
bring back the game nights. Let's,
yeah,
at Christmas, we're going to spend a couple of days and just be alone together and have some really nice conversation and, um, spend the family time together because we realized how important that is. So
Yeah.
that's all part of getting ahead of the stress. That's something we talk about in this piece is how do we get ahead of it and how do we keep going out of this through this transition.
And I think it's so important to be conscious of it first, right? And I'm probably just as much at fault, I guess you might say, of not always noticing if there's stress. I can be a doer, so I'm just doing, and I have to physically take a step back and say, "Whoa, what is driving me?" And this, like, is it stress? Is it just because things need to get done? And sometimes there's good stress, right? And that's okay. That's what motivates us to get, finish on a timeline that we need to. But is it more of a toxic type stress that is going to wear down my system? So
Well, and I think you've talked about this, Shannon, when you've had a headache and you feel like something's off. And it's usually often I think it's happened in the winter when we've been busy, when we've been traveling for work and whatnot. And because I remember you saying you just felt like something was off and you realized all of a sudden you had a raging headache. Well, and that would make sense, right? That's where your stress is manifesting. It's attacking you basically physically.
yes, absolutely. And without just even taking those few moments to say, oh, this is a headache. Perhaps you should eat. Perhaps, you may have to
Have you
take
drank enough water? Have you?
what went on today that didn't do all of the other things when you have a great day that you don't get a headache. What did you leave out in that? And I think sometimes it is, it doesn't have to be complex. It can just be simple of, oh, we were really busy, we had a whole lot of work to get done, oh, the whole day was kind of looking different than what we're used to.
Yeah.
It's just really just evaluating that and acknowledging it.
Well, and sometimes, so when you're talking about getting ahead of the stress curve, and that could be um, packing your lunch or planning your lunch if you're still working at home when you get back into the office, if that's part of your job, packing your lunch, menu planning. I know for myself, I fell in a rut of not planning my meals and buying the groceries for those meals like I did when I was bringing my lunch every day. And then sometimes I just would throw something together at noon and not eat properly. So to get ahead of that, it is really planning on how you're going to take care of yourself and pay attention to that for the
And
day.
why is it not as important when you're at home, if that's
Exactly.
right, when you're at the office?
Yeah.
Because yes, for sure, it's a little bit about an access thing, but you're right, you're more likely to make choices that aren't going to help us how we feel, if we
Mhm.
haven't really planned around that. Um,
Yeah, well, and I know when I was at the beginning of the pandemic, I think I was drinking more coffee than I normally do because it was about access and it was about, comfort in my home, feeling cozy, drinking more coffee. And then I was having trouble sleeping and I was having more headaches pop up as well, right?
yeah.
Um, so it all comes into play with that physical health when we're not planning.
Yeah, it's just that kind of domino piece, right? Um,
Absolutely.
I think it's the same when we're understanding our emotions, right?
Mhm.
Where are we actually feeling in this? Are we in a little bit of that grieving cycle for the things we've lost? And, we talked a little bit about Christmas. Do not tell me if people were honest, if they weren't able to see their families at that time. Yeah, we accommodated for it. We did our best. Maybe we met across Zoom and all of those kind of things, and we appreciated that. But it's okay to say you're a little sad about it too, because you
Yeah.
really,
Or,
like you said, your son couldn't come in, right? Of
yeah.
course you're sad about that. Like, who wouldn't be
Yeah.
if that's
Or
something?
how many people had elderly parents and or grandparents that they could not see because their home was on lockdown.
Absolutely. And it's great. I think people, got pretty creative in ways to try to communicate with their standing outside, but it isn't the same. And I think it's okay.
No, it's not the same.
Yeah. And even if it's, that sense of restlessness too. sometimes that's just that feeling we're not really sure what we're feeling and we can't quite identify it. It's a feeling like we should do something, but what does that mean? What do we do? So it's, some of those things like Paula had said earlier is just, maybe it is just simplifying and going back to some routines that we had before, like packing our lunches, making sure we're making a plan for the week so we can take some of that unrest piece away from it, that you can count on at least that's all done. And then you can look to the other, maybe work expectations, whatever it is that is also causing it. And maybe there's a way to come up with, some scheduling of that work. Sometimes we abandon all of those pieces too, because we're at home. Oh my goodness, what I've never done this before. So should I sit here every minute or can I get up? We probably got up 20 times when we're at work. So it's just
Yeah, exactly.
we can normalize things as much as we can, but just identify what those feelings are.
Mhm. And I think when we're talking about identifying and understanding our emotions, that also comes into play with taking action to protect your long-term health, right? And again, like this, the being conscious of your stress, like this is all actually part of the holistic wellness philosophy, right? It all is working. Um, it's all interconnected, right? We have to look at all these pieces, and because it's going to impact something else.
Absolutely. And once again, maybe it's getting back to a little bit of a routine. If you used to
Yeah.
do something on a bike in the morning, maybe there's something you could do, whether it be jumping jacks or something in your basement or, in your home if you weren't able to go out at the time. But now as things open up and, hopefully the weather stays nice, that maybe we can take care of some of those things that just, it's amazing impact just going and getting outside, how that is for your body and your health and wellness and well-being. Just feeling the difference of that air blowing across. But you're still
Yeah,
walking.
sunshine on your face.
Yeah, that vitamin D level, they can't speak enough about where our levels sit and how sun and things like that play a big piece of it. So
Well,
it's,
and I know oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know something that will affect my long-term health if I'm not careful. So because I don't have to get up as early, I'm not packing a lunch, I'm not getting ready the same way that I was when I was going to work. I can't really speak to the commute because it's only about 2 minutes, so that doesn't come into play. But for some people, it does. If you're out of town and it takes you, 20 minutes, half an hour to actually get into town, you don't have to do that if you're working from home. So maybe if you're like me, I started to go to bed a little bit later because I didn't have to get up quite as early. But if I continue that and I have to go back into the office some days, as we transition, um, I'm going to, and I'm still going to bed later, it's going to eventually catch up to me. And so I'm going to have to reset. And I think, again, that speaks to routine because my routine has changed all around we've been working at home since the end of March last year. So in that time, my routine has definitely changed. It is not as consistent, definitely not as it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's okay to step back. We had what we had across this year and a half-ish, a year and a bit. But yeah, you're right. If we're looking ahead again, if we're going to move towards that, your place of work is saying, hey, you're going to spend more time at work or whatever it is, then it's okay to look at that schedule again and say, okay, yeah, maybe I just need to in small chunks move back 10 minutes of when I would go to bed. Maybe it's 10 minutes earlier. So we're not just being too extreme and going from one side to the other. And then we get rebellious about it. Um,
Yeah,
just taking slow steps back. And I think,
absolutely.
summer, people have experienced this for years, right? We kind of abandon all things, especially here in Alberta, because we
Yeah.
think we only have a few months of nice weather.
Or especially if your kids are young, right? And they're off school, you really do throw caution to the wind and try a whole bunch of new things
And
during
then
the summer.
we're always wondering, why did it all fall apart when we're trying to go
Yeah.
in August? So
Or why are the kids grumpy on a holiday? Well, because they crave routine and consistency.
Absolutely. And I think we've talked to our families nonstop about, yeah, it's okay to, forego some of those rules that we have, but the more we can stick to that routine, it's okay. Nobody's losing out in summer. In fact, they're probably gaining because they're in a better mental state to enjoy the day because they went to bed at a reasonable time. And, when you have those special days that you stay up a little bit late, but they're not the norm, they're actually the exception, then it makes it something special, but because the rest of the time, you're going to be able to get all the things that you need.
Well, and I think it's important to look at COVID did have some good things about maybe not COVID-19, the virus itself, but our experience over this past year and a bit is maybe take a look at what worked well during this time.
Yeah,
If you're a mom or dad that has kids in multiple activities, maybe you actually need to look at that and pare some of that down. Maybe they don't need to be in so many activities. Maybe if there is, um, long term. Maybe it's more beneficial for them to be at home together, spending a bit more time, and they can pick and choose the activities that really are meaningful to them. Re-looking at what you're doing on weekends. And also, I think a lot more people were actually making home cooked meals. That is definitely a good thing. Obviously, there's a place for eating out, and we don't want to take anything away from the restaurant, from those businesses. But there is something to be said for making more home cooked meals and doing it as a family,
absolutely.
using that as a time to have quality time together.
And I think, it's a great thing that we've always said to families is carving out time to have that as a family
Mm,
conversation about what are the things, what did we learn out of the last year? What are the things we loved? So let's put that on this list. What are the things that were really challenging to us? Let's put this on this list. And then let's keep some of those things that really did work well. Let's challenge the things that challenged us and see if we can come up with alternatives around that. But it just makes it concrete for everybody, and everybody has a voice to it because we carved out time to hear it from everybody. We
yeah,
said, regardless, not even about a pandemic, we just suggest that for families always to have those conversations because you need to act together all as one. And but even if you're just the individual living on your own, the same thing can apply to be able to make that very concrete list of, hey, these are the things that I really did enjoy, that I never would have experienced, or that, I did experience and enjoyed them. Here's the things that, as we talk about reaching out to family and friends, I didn't get the opportunity to do that as much. So how can I carve that back in to my life, that as we transition forward, but in a reasonable way that I can still carry out all the other pieces in my life too.
absolutely.
So we have this in about this practicing social distancing is just more about as we're moving forward, because we're going to have some different experiences for sure, different perceptions about where we're at, different anxiety levels of what people are feeling. So it's still just keeping these ideas of that, that we're going to have to maybe look at that in a different way that we haven't before, right? That's all, that we're connecting in a different way. Maybe we maintained some of those things that we learned
Mhm.
that, right? Like we said about meeting across Zoom. I'm sure once again, if we said 3 years ago to people, hey, you know what, you're going to connect with your family and friends mainly on this type of platform, everybody would have said, you're crazy, not
Yep,
happening. Where now we've seen the benefit of that, that wherever you are in the world, we actually get to see in real time, um, your relatives growing up, whatever it is, or your moms, your dads, on that other end, and you're having a real time conversation where we wouldn't have had that before.
absolutely.
And then, of course, I think if we learned anything in this is really, if we're going to make that list that we talked about, scheduling into the things that we love to do. And I just, we threw up some pictures of different things that, are important to us. Um, in different ways, for myself, of course, and I know Paula's the same about going out for walks with their dog. um, that it was something that motivated me. It was beyond just my need. It was somebody else's, my dog's need to be able to go out. And it's just, I've done it in a more regular basis because I feel
Yeah.
responsible to that, like beyond myself. So there's less chance for an excuse as to why I do it.
Well,
Too.
and just even being at home, working at home, right? Needing that break to get up away from your computer, and 'cause there's no photocopy room or water cooler or break room to go to. And so that's how I think got in a better habit with my dogs as well, because I needed to get up and take a 5 minute walk around the block with them. Or I was going right after work also because I was here and it was just more accessible. But I also saw other people doing that as well. I mean, didn't bike sales go up like a huge amount over the pandemic? And people were out doing things. They were accessing what we already have in our communities, the walking trails, the walking paths. This winter, our town created these really cool skating ice paths. And there were so many people out accessing things for free, spending time together. And I think it's really important to schedule time to continue to do that.
Yeah. And by creating that list, you're when you put something down, it is more real, right?
Mhm.
Tangible when you say, yeah, we actually really loved going down to that skating figure eight, and connecting that way and trying out, like I know even for myself, I hadn't skated in years. And I was probably not likely to go down to a ice rink to skate, but this was pretty accessible for me. Certainly learned some things of how to stand up on my feet, maybe. Um, but yeah, there's all kinds of things. And, Paul had said it before about so many people going back and actually cooking for themselves. And I don't think we were any different in that. We were trying out different recipes that maybe we hadn't before, really challenging ourselves around that to not just be stuck in making whatever the easiest thing is or what we're comfortable with, but looking to other kind of recipes and getting everybody involved in the process of it, which was kind of cool as
And
well.
maybe it's continuing some of those things in a more reasonable way as we get back to uh, less restrictions because of COVID. And it's maybe instead of always going out to eat, picking a couple times during the month where you have people over and everyone's bringing a home cooked dish, or getting back to the paint nights where people are getting together. And maybe it's not always about having to get together at a specific place. You could do a virtual paint night,
Yeah,
and that would actually be really fun as well. But again, it is back to scheduling and being purposeful with the time.
absolutely. And making it, yeah, something of importance. And I really like the strategy of focusing on the things that are within your control, because I think that
Mm.
speaks to that disillusionment part, right? We got
Yeah, for
in
sure.
a world where we truly didn't have control on things, on how we could do things, where we could travel to, all of those kind of things. So keeping it a little bit simple, let's worry about the things that we can control. And that does come down to just eating healthy, right? We're not saying you have to be extravagant, not, I know the cost of organic things are very expensive at times too. It's just getting back to the basics of
Yep.
real foods and knowing what it is we're eating and putting in us. A carrot, um, that is just a live, real carrot is quite a bit different than even a frozen one. But if that's what we have access to, even you getting back and cooking that, well, that's even a good start for sure.
Well, and I know at one time I was talking to a university student and they were talking about eating healthy on a student budget. And they went back to, you reminded me when you said back to basics with your eating, it was buying fruits like apples and oranges that were maybe cheaper than strawberries and raspberries, because they had to shift their way of buying things because that's what their mom would buy, but whole different financial bracket, I guess. So they would still eat healthy, but it was sticking to those more basic foods. buying a bag of carrots, even the bags of organic carrots. If you're buying it a bigger bag, they're not that much more expensive. So it really is looking around, finding what's cost effective, maybe adding in a meatless night and buy some beans, because beans are super inexpensive, and adopting it that way.
Yes, getting creative around that. There's just so many things that you
Yes.
do that, you know, that just takes on a whole different piece of your brain when you're using that creativity, and then adding it to something that maybe you wouldn't see as being creative. But when you're cooking and you add in something different that you're not used to, you are calling upon that creativity. So that's a great
Yeah.
way to use the brain too.
Yeah. And I think we've talked a bit about exercising. And it, again, we're not saying you need to go to a scheduled class or um, something that you're not comfortable with. You
Absolutely.
can go out and walk, and that is absolutely
Yes,
wonderful.
within your control, right?
Yes, again, yeah,
Doesn't matter if it's a sidewalk or it's a walking path. Either will do. I know
absolutely.
when it was really cold, my sister loves to just run up and down the stairs, just to get a
Yeah.
exercise, knowing that, you know, if you can't go outside because it is -30 in the winter, well, you still can do something small and don't set yourself up for failure. Not saying you're going to do that for a half hour, but 10 minutes is even awesome.
And I think something that is within our control is trying something new. And if you want to try something new, you don't have to try it on your own if it's something that you're fearful of. If you want to take an exercise class or you want to go to a gym, find a buddy that will go with you, or access group classes, or access a personal trainer. Look for deals. Often you can find a deal. And so I think it is setting some reasonable goals for yourself also puts things within your control.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a
And you
great,
can write your goals in a journal.
yes, exactly. And I think, you know, we've talked about this before where we had 21-day journaling challenge. We're not saying that you necessarily have to do it to that degree. Start small, keep it simple. But sometimes this gives us the opportunity to do that reflection that, and it's in a purposeful, intentional way. So we are looking towards, we're not stressed over it. Hey, are we writing down the right amount of things? No, this is your time. This is in your control, what you want to reflect upon. But when we're intentional, we can actually learn quite a bit out of that.
When I started just using, I downloaded a notebook app on my phone, and or you can use the notes in your phone, because sometimes I think about things when I'm out walking, or if I'm doing cooking or something where your mind is just kind of neutral. I guess you're not working, and it just things flow into my mind. So my phone is accessible; it's right there, and so I'll jot it down in my phone, and that's been really helpful for me. And then I go back and I reflect on it, and it's interesting because things that I wrote, say 3 weeks ago, sometimes I don't even remember going through what I was going through or thinking about that, or um, writing it down. So it's interesting to go back and reflect on things that you write down.
Isn't that a great way? Because that talks about that stress that sometimes we're not really sure where it's come from. But when we
Yeah.
these little snippets down and you go back and reflect upon that and you can relate to, oh, okay. And sometimes that just gets it to be able to put those thoughts in a place that you don't have to carry it. So that
Yes.
reduces some stress as well. But then it also gives us some material that when we're in that state to really want to dive into what it is, it gives us a little bit of words and insight to, hey, maybe this is where that was coming from.
Well, I think for me, anyways, when I'm not necessarily worrying about anyone else seeing it, I can be more vulnerable, and I can just really express what I need to get out. And the notes on your phone, you can lock them if you want to lock them, and you can just really explore, what's going on inside. And I think that would really um, create some, like, really expand, I guess maybe is the word, your emotional wellness also.
Yeah, absolutely.
The last one that is within our control is keeping alcohol consumption to a minimum. I
Yeah.
think that one is really important to note. I think many people did use alcohol at the beginning of the pandemic, just from the research. I think people used it as a way to cope with the stress and uncertainty.
Yeah. which of course we know is not that uncommon, but certainly
Yes.
I think it surprised some people to get themselves caught in a pattern that maybe they typically would not have. One thing about alcohol, it's certainly not group specific, or it can challenge anyone. So,
Mhm.
well, it can't happen to me because I'm this, this, and this. Actually, when you get into a habit of doing something and you're using that, like it's good to just challenge as to why it is whether it's using the alcohol or drinking the alcohol. Are you giving it a purpose? Because that changes the intention around it, as
Well,
opposed
and
to
that's going to
a glass of wine.
absolutely, and that's going to affect the long term
Yes,
as well.
absolutely. And of course, one the main strategies they talk about is just even learning more. We talk lots about that intellectual piece of our well-being that can stimulate a whole lot of growth. And sometimes going back to that control piece, when we learn a little bit more, we feel a little bit more in control. If we know that, like we've talked about other webinars we've done where we go and dive in deeper about our wellness wheel in each aspect, when you know more, then you can relate it to what it is that's getting in the way or making you feel a certain way. So it's just seeking that out, looking for different courses, or like we said, podcasts. There's so many great podcasts out there, no matter what realm you're in. And that could just inspire some other thoughts around if sometimes it's just distraction, sometimes it is about learning. Gives us more insight and information again to be able to discover what's going on with us.
Just an alternative to sitting in front of the TV as well.
Absolutely.
Support groups are one of our favorite things to build that connection with other people who are going through similar situations. And I think there are more support groups. There's online groups as well. And hopefully the in-person groups will open up soon again. But yeah, there's lots of things out there. And I think just maybe connecting through social media as well would be one way to find out. Often your primary care networks would have information on that. Doctors' offices, mental health and addictions offices would have information on, even if it is a group that's not necessarily about mental health and addictions, because that foundation that they are talking about as well is creating optimal wellness or better wellness for yourself. So they would have information on support groups. Churches, another place to be connected with groups.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if you mentioned it, Paula, the FCS places like
Absolutely.
the Family Resource Network, all of those kind of places will know at least if there's other organizations or peoples or churches that are providing something. Or if you're really inspired, start your own. Um,
Absolutely.
met a lady at one of our webinars who had started a very specific sport group due to her own experiences, and has expanded it to have that conversation with other people that have gone through similar experiences. So why not? If there's one thing, once again, that this type of format has given us, we can connect with people no matter how far away they are, that have like experiences, and the how that can help when you can talk to somebody who can truly understand the impact or gravity of the situation that you've been through is incredible. We've watched it firsthand with families have that support, and it's almost transformational what can happen. We can't solve all problems, but just knowing that there's somebody out there in life that has experienced something similar is can be profound.
Absolutely.
And then finally, it's when do we need that professional help? Like it's not always, it's individual, right? I don't think we can just give you a nice list to say absolute, but we always believe sooner than later is what becomes important. Reaching out for professional help is not saying there's some weakness. It's actually takes a lot of bravery to do that at this stage, but you can learn so much. It doesn't mean you are now committed for life to have to be involved with professionals. Sometimes that's what gives you the inspiration or just connects the pieces that you've tried all these other things that it doesn't seem to quite still connect with how you're feeling or why you're not being able to move forward, whatever the case might be.
Sometimes it's just gives you the ability to just have that unbiased person in your space, just allowing you to, they're basically creating space for you to just take a look at whatever it is that you're going through, or problem solve through something that you're going through. And it just gives you that space that often we don't take. Or sometimes when we're going through things, we cycle through them in our heads. We ruminate on the issues, and we're not able to really get out of that cycle. And we need someone else to facilitate that with us.
Yeah, that unbiased opinion,
Yeah, absolutely.
objective in it, that we don't, even if you have that great person around you that you know really well, sometimes you're not sure what their opinion might be. So maybe you're a little reserved on what you're saying. So that's why, like Paula said, this truly unbiased person is sitting there, but has the knowledge to be able to maybe work you through some steps to really open up your mind about what's, inhibiting that growth and movement forward.
Well, it's practice in allowing yourself to be vulnerable, because professionals are bound by confidentiality, an oath of confidentiality. It's their ethical um, part of their practice
Mhm.
to maintain that confidentiality. So it gives you that space to be able to be vulnerable.
And I think what often comes up in that is the cost, right? We're well aware of what professional supports can cost. And do look that, if you have some workplace benefits, an EAP program, which is an employee assisted program, is, a great way to consider that. We often say talk to, if, your organization is large enough where they have an HR department, things like that, they should have some
And
information.
your supervisor,
Yeah, definitely.
or even if you have a website for your organization, it would be on there. I just want to mention as well that when we're talking about cost, often through the family and community services or family and community support services, depends on your community, often they subsidize counseling. I know in our community, the counseling, it's individual or family, and the individual can get $50 a day, and working is, I think, simple because of that subsidized piece to the cost.
That sliding scale.
Sorry, my internet is
Yeah, it's just cutting out.
glitchy. Mhm.
Yeah, that sliding scale, and that can really help with that. And other possibilities are you can get benefits outside of an organization as well. Of course, there's still money attached to that, but yeah, like it's worth looking into and diving into. And I think that we made a little bit of a list of what we like to call red flags. Maybe of times that if you need that exterior piece telling you when maybe is a good time to seek that out. We like to call them red flags because it is things that, if things are persisting for weeks and just feel like you're absolutely stuck and cannot move forward, it is probably a good time to seek that out. And like we said, it's not, if you have to think of it as though you're not committing to something forever, because you're probably not. But it is definitely might just give you that start to get out of that feeling where it feels a little bit hopeless, right? Where we just can't quite move forward with something. And sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. My internet's a bit glitchy.
Okay. And just, if we're finding that our ability of the things that we normally could do and function on a daily basis, that if that's not there, it can be as easy as normally you're pretty productive at work and you can get, if it's 4 of the 5 things done, that we always put too many things on our plate anyways. But if we still can't do the typical things that we could do, and we're finding that's persisting as well, it's probably worth as well looking into. And then, of course, if it has gotten to the point where you're feeling there's any thoughts around self harm or suicide, you're feeling that overwhelmed, whatever that over feeling of weight that is on you, please, we do hope that you will seek out help. There's lots of helplines, even in that, that are a great place to start. No cost. You make that connection right away. Please do not leave yourself in that space. Nobody needs to be left there. But there, do not feel it's just something that is individual to you. There's many people out there that have felt like that. That once again is not a sign of weakness. It is certainly a sign of just being so overwhelmed that you just are not moving forward. And that's what we talk
Well,
that. Sorry, go ahead.
no, sorry. And mental health offices or mental health and addictions offices, they're often combined. They are, if you're in a situation like that where you're feeling that you want to self-harm or have thoughts of suicide, those offices, their services are free of charge. So
Yes.
that's definitely a place to start talking to your doctor, talking to a friend at that point. It's overwhelming and it's scary, but you need to talk to someone.
And that
And
really does come from that, those feelings of hopelessness and helpless.
absolutely.
And I think
Hmm.
at some point, everybody could say, probably across this past year, to some degree, we've all felt that because things have been out of our control. But it's,
Yes.
we're talking about persistent feelings that are just not going away, where you just can't seem to shake it. It's still feeling there, and that weight is there. And there's no such thing as it's too small a feeling. Hopeless.
Absolutely.
It's how you feel about it.
Hmm. Yeah. And the professionals are professionals for a reason. They will know what to say, they will know the questions to ask.
Yes.
So definitely good information, Shannon.
And we just had a piece that we like to leave in, and we've kind of covered it throughout this evening about that personal reflection piece. No matter how you choose to do it, whether it is, like Paula said, having notes on our phone and being able to, as feelings pop up and things like that, that is what we mean by personal reflection on things like, and questioning yourself. It's okay to question yourself, like, hey, how am I feeling? Am I feeling content? Because if I'm not, why am I not challenging myself to say why? Right? Sometimes we don't know why, but then it's maybe logging some of those feelings or thoughts or whatever it is in one place that we can go back and spend some time reflecting on it.
Hmm. And we talked a lot, I think, about control as well. And um, maybe it is looking at what you do have control of and what you want to have control of, but you don't. And how do you get to that point? And that's maybe where you access someone as well. There's life coaches, often EFAP programs will do that as well. And then, of course, there's personal life coaches, which is something that we do also. And in life coaching, we would help you if there's an issue. We would help you to work through that issue, get some background information, and then set some goals to be able to move forward as well with that.
And it's once again taking that little bit deeper dive into just because there's an area that you feel like that's where you're starting. That's okay. Like if that's not where we land in the end, this is how we start disseminating that information and figuring out what's getting in the way of your path moving forward. And we, as we've talked about this whole evening, is looking at that whole wellness piece. And then we focus on a few goals that will have impacts in each one of those areas, but it's not so overwhelming that, oh my goodness, I got to start this, and this. We just keep it simple, start simple, and then those pieces will naturally flow into the others. And then, identifying some priorities as well can be a great way to like things when we go back and we talked about some of the things that really went well during the pandemic, like maybe the family got together on a regular basis. Maybe you had those family meetings to decide what the week was going to look like because you're juggling so many things and so many people within the home. Maintaining some of those, really carving out some time for that leisure time, friends, work, whatever it is, and identifying that in a scheduled piece that we know what to predict, right? That if that's kind of gone by the wayside, then we can bring that back in and we'll feel a little bit more in control and we can reflect on what went well. And then we can progress from there as well.
Mhm. And then, do I know who to access for support in my community? And so this is not just the formal supports, this is also informal supports, the support groups that are set up by people who want to connect with others that are experiencing the same things. Um, and it is just looking for leaders in the community.
Absolutely. And I think that naturally leads us into the piece of the whole purpose of the rural mental health project is, once again, as I had said before, looking at the strengths within the community. Yes, we do have the Canadian mental health on there because, they are providing some programs, just their website alone can connect us to some degree. But we are slowly building up this hub so that will be able to find things local here that can connect us, such as ourselves, that we do things like the consulting, teaching, and coaching as well. That's just a different level of professional support, where mental health, of course, will be a part of that hub, but maybe it is the family and community supports. Maybe it is your local gym because they have personal trainers, nutritional consultants, all of those kind of things. But ultimately, I also wanted to highlight a new website that has come out called Together All. It's well worth having a look into. We also have some of the information on the resource hub, but it's a peer-to-peer support. So you're connecting with peers, but there is that professional piece in the background so that if the peer support isn't enough, and when you've connected there, they're able to step in and connect with you on the outside of that. But like we talked about in that support group sense of things, often we can connect with our peers that are going through similar circumstances or somewhat similar circumstances, and maybe get some insight that way. And that's the basis of the Together All piece. But like I said, it is monitored with psychologists so that you're not kind of caught in something that maybe should go in a more professional direction. They're there to advise that. But it's all, you're not giving any identifying pieces, so it's all anonymous. So you can go on there, have that conversation, be as vulnerable as you need to be, but not feel as though, oh my goodness, now the world's going to have this information about me.
Right, which is really important when you're wanting to chat about a challenge or an issue that's happening in your life.
Mhm. And just
The
finally,
mental, oh, sorry,
go ahead.
the mental health resource and mental health and well-being resource hub is something that we're putting together as part of our rural mental health project, and so that it is on our website. So take a look. We are putting together different resources in the community, like you saw on the slide before, and so they'll on our website there will be a direct link to their site, and so we are always looking for other people such as the support group that we were talking about, if they have information that they can pass on to others, psychologists, fitness instructors, leaders in the community. Basically, if you have a link that we can connect people to, please let us know. Send us an email or message us again on our social media sites to provide that information, and we'll gladly put it on our hub.
Yes, and I think we're trying to make it as easy as possible that if people
Mhm.
you will be able to click right there on that person and it will take you right to their site. So it's a pretty easy 1-2 step kind of thing, where you can get those additional resources or information around that person or that support.
Right.
Well, thank you very much for coming out tonight. And like you said, we'll be putting all of this together with the annotated piece, and then we'll be putting it up on YouTube so that if you have others that might be interested in finding out a little bit more about transitioning to through where we've been with COVID and where we're going, please give them that, and you'll see it on our social media pages as well, some of those links. But ultimately, if you go back to our website, we'll be putting it up on there and you'll be able to follow the link and it'll take you right to YouTube as well.
Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.